So, your mother spent 30 years and several $1,000s building a family trust so the tax man would never touch what she left you. Then she died, and the first number you learned was this one: 40%. That's the federal skip tax, a flat 40 cents on the dollar charged on top of the estate tax the moment money jumps a generation. But here's what nobody tells the heir. The tax was never the trap. The trust was. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly what your mother actually left you, and it isn't the money. The property, in this case, is a piece of paper, not a vineyard, not a lighthouse, not a building you can walk into. A document in a drawer, on a mahogany desk in a lawyer's office. While your mother was alive, that document was a revocable living trust, the most ordinary instrument in American estate planning. Not a dynasty vehicle, not a tax shelter for the rich, the everyday tool of a homeowner over 55 who wanted the house and the brokerage account to skip probate and someone to manage things if she lost capacity. While she lived, she could change it any afternoon, rewrite it, tear it up, move the house back out. It bent to her every wish because she was the grantor and a revocable trust answers to the person who made it. And then she died, and at the instant of her death, the document did something the living rarely watch happen. It hardened. Revocable became irrevocable. The clauses she could once edit on a whim became law, fixed, binding, and addressed to you. On paper, you're an heir. In practice, you're an applicant. Here is the first thing the document does. It splits your inheritance into 3, and most heirs don't learn which one they hold until the meeting is over. You might inherit as a beneficiary, the right to receive what the instrument allows when the trustee decides it allows it. You might inherit the successor trustee role, a fiduciary office with duties and personal liability, often managing money for your own siblings. Or you might inherit through the trust a house passing cleanly to you down a probate-avoiding pipe, settled upstream before it reached you. Most people create a trust. An heir inherits a position someone else designed, and whichever one you're holding, there's a meter running underneath it. Hand the trust to a bank, a corporate trustee, and that bank charges an annual percentage of the principal. Not a percentage of what you take out, a percentage of the whole pile billed every year, whether you touch it or not. The going rate runs from 0.5% to 2%. Think of it as a dead hand on the dial. She built a machine to keep governing the money after she was gone, and it charges rent. Take a $2 million trust. A corporate trustee, depending on the fee tier and how long the trust runs, can drain somewhere between roughly $500,000 and $900,000 out of it. That assumes a fee around 1%, a trust that runs 25 or 30 years, and no distributions large enough to slow the meter. A column that only ever runs one direction. And the family chose this. They set up the trust to dodge probate, a one-time cost at death, and signed the heirs up for a multi-decade one. Most families never owed estate tax at all. The federal exemption sits at $15 million per person under the 2025 law, and the overwhelming majority of estates fall miles below it. The tax the trust was sold to defeat was one almost nobody was ever going to pay. What it delivers instead is quieter and harder to undo. Control. The first surprise isn't a number, it's a committee. As a beneficiary, you don't withdraw your inheritance. You request it. You petition the trustee, and at a bank, that often means a trust administration committee, a room of people you've never met, voting on 30 to 60-day cycles on whether your request fits the document. You bring a reason, a budget worksheet, invoices, sometimes your tax returns. They measure it against the standard your mother chose: HEMS, health, education, maintenance, and support. Maintenance and support are generous words until you read the case law. They let the trustee keep you in the manner you were accustomed to. They do not let you buy something better, so the down payment on a bigger house, the business you wanted to start, the thing that would change your life rather than maintain it. A committee of strangers can decline it, in writing, using rules a dead woman wrote. The dead hand on the dial doesn't charge rent. It decides what you're allowed to want. There is one place the trust quietly does the heir a favor, and it turns on a single word: revocable. Under the tax code, an asset that passes at death has its cost basis reset to its value on the day of death. The step-up. A house bought for $200,000, worth $2 million when your mother died, passes to you with the gain erased, but assets she moved into an irrevocable trust years ago sit outside her estate, and the law denies them the step-up. The same paperwork that dodged one tax hands you the original gain on another. And if the trust keeps its income rather than paying it out, the tax code turns vicious fast. A trust hits the top 37% federal bracket at roughly $16,000 of retained income. An individual doesn't reach that bracket until well past $600,000, a compression of more than 40 to 1, which is why trustees rush the income out to the beneficiaries every year, so the tax lands on a person and not on the trust. The machine has a tax problem of its own and hands you the bill. Meet the Friberg family. Barbara Friberg, the mother, did everything the right way. She created an irrevocable trust, the Friberg Family 2016 Trust, holding property in New Jersey and Florida. She did what the lawyers always recommended with more than one child. She named both her sons co-trustees, Robert and Keith, two brothers sharing the office, with a clause requiring every major decision be unanimous. On paper, it was airtight. Neither brother could move the property without the other. She had built a machine that forced her sons to cooperate. Then Barbara died, and the machine met the family. Keith sold the Florida property without his brother's agreement, in plain violation of the unanimous decision clause his mother wrote, and the buyer was Keith. He sold the family's Florida property to himself for a recorded price of $10. Robert sued for breach of fiduciary duty and for fraud. The brother Barbara had appointed to protect the estate had instead reached into it with a $10 deed and tried to walk out the side door with a house. The court was not amused. It removed Keith as trustee. It ordered the Florida property reconveyed into the trust, and it entered judgments against him totaling $856,592, plus another $112,882 in counsel fees. A $10 deed became a $1 million judgment. This is not a celebrity estate. Two brothers in New Jersey, a mother who tried to be fair, and a document that turned them into opposing parties in a courtroom. And the Fribergs are not rare. In Michigan, a man named David White held the office of co-trustee on his own family's trust. Over 5 years, the state said he embezzled at least $400,000. The probate court had already removed him in 2019 after he failed to produce the financial accountings the law required. He was sentenced in 2025, 4 to 20 years in prison. The sibling holding the office can turn the trust into a private till. All it takes is for no one to force an accounting. Now, turn it around. Imagine you're not the brother who got cheated. You're the one Barbara trusted, the careful one. A widowed daughter in her 60s named successor trustee of her late parents' trust because the house and the accounts were titled into it. You didn't apply for this. You inherited a part-time job with personal legal liability the day your mother died, and your brother, grieving, short on cash, asks you for an early distribution, one the document does not allow. So you read the rules your mother left and find 2 doors, both costing you something you can't get back. You can enforce the trust, deny the request, follow the instrument to the letter, and become the villain in your own family story, the sister who said no over the body of a parent barely buried. Or you can relax the terms, quietly approve what the document forbids, keep the peace, keep your brother. Enforce the trust and you lose your brother. Relax it and you lose your house. Because the moment you bend the rules, you've breached your fiduciary duty, and a trustee who breaches is personally liable. Your own bank account is now exposed to a lawsuit from any beneficiary who feels shorted. There is no door marked both legally safe and emotionally survivable. The trust has converted your grief into administration. And here's the cruelest mechanic in the whole instrument, one almost no heir sees coming until they're inside it. If a beneficiary sues a trustee for misconduct, the trustee can generally pay for the defense out of the trust itself until a court finally proves it. Read that again. The money you are suing to protect funds the lawyers fighting you. The trustee bills the trust to manage it, then bills the trust to defend himself from you. You are paying both sides of a lawsuit against your own inheritance until a judge says stop. The dead hand wrote that rule too. So, strip it all back. The 40% number that opened the door turns out to be the least of it. Most families never pay it. What your mother left you was the architecture, the ages, the standards, the trustee, the fee schedule, the committee that votes on what you're allowed to want, and the resentments those rules light up across the dinner table. Roughly $13 trillion now sits in irrevocable trusts, close to a quarter of the wealth of the top 1%. Money that outlives the people who made it, still issuing instructions. You don't inherit the money. You inherit a chair at a table with rules carved by a dead hand.